It's great to be here to talk about something I could talk to you for about 5 hours about mills. It's a really interesting topic because they're so unique. You know, they're not like big houses or anything else. You generally find them here, there, and everywhere, and the local history associated with them. You know, it goes back. A lot of them go back 300 odd years. Some even older than that. So there's so much attachment to them, but say in the 40s, 50s, 60s, they're all getting kind of stopped, and it's kind of a journey to rediscover and record people, and that's the memory map is absolutely fantastic. To record what is left and the knowledge that is left here is so important, because I was speaking to Scotchers about 8 years ago and recording their memories. And I could only find 10 across the whole of Northern Ireland, and out of those 8 Scotchers, there's only one of them still living to this day. So it's really important for you to have to write down any sort of memory attached, and just to preserve that for future generations. So yes, it was about 2017 or 2015. I am not even too sure when I did this, to be honest. I was probably still at university, and I was a wee bit bored. I wasn't going out as much, clearly. And I was working at Wellbrook Beetling Mill outside Cookstown, which it's a National Trust property that does tours of the beetling mill and the finishing of linen cloth. And people always came in and saying, "Oh, this mill here, do you know about that? And there's a mill in Keady, there's a mill in Market Hill, there's a mill here." And I thought to myself, there must have been mills everywhere. So I took out an old Ordnance Survey map and then started to see that there were just hundreds of them. And I wanted to make a kind of a map of the Cookstown area where I'm from, to show where they all were. And that wasn't enough. Wanted to do Mid Ulster, wanted to do County Tyrone, wanted to do Antrim, eventually did Northern Ireland. Now, it took me about 5 years to do all that. And last 2 years ago, I decided tried to do the rest of Ireland. I'm kind of stuck in Sligo. There's just mills everywhere. But it's a free website. It's millsofnorthernireland.com. You can go on to it. Each of these wee dots. What really took a lot of time is I went through the Public Records Office, the valuation revision books. They have what's called, that's all online, and it's digitized. I went through every single townland in Northern Ireland to find a mill, the value of the building, who owned it, and all sorts. So what you can do is essentially word search the entire website, and it'll bring you up the surnames of people that work there. And Americans are constantly contacting me. I had an Australian person ring up to say that Nicole Kidman's relatives were originally from Ireland and were millers, and whether I had any information. So it's you get into all sorts of kind of random situations as a result of doing this. So this is the locality here. So do you know, for this particular area, there isn't much, but that's just down to the geology of the area. You have mountains, quite mountainous, but you do have streams which are power the various mills. So we have the corn mills kind of dotted there, by far the most popular mill in Fermanagh anyway. You have the creameries. Now I started to do that because they were quite interesting in their own right. Not technically a mill. Sawmills, there's quite a lot of them. These stars that you see are sawmills, and other sorts of interesting sites such as bleaching mills and stuff like that. So there's a real wide variety of kind of sites in this particular area. So it's quite interesting. There's quite a lot of remains left of mills here as well. I'll talk about most of them in this Killesher Parish. I'm going to talk one about, and there's one down in Derrylin as well I'll talk about, which is really interesting. So again, because they're kind of so far removed, almost, some of them have been preserved pretty well and have been restored, Tully Mill and, Mullycovert as well. So they're really kind of nice examples to see to this day. So yeah, it was kind of, I put this live on the internet in 2016, and it's tried to share photographs and things like that. I don't do that as much now as working full time and all sorts, but what I do give a lot of talks, and people asking me to give talks annoys me, to go in to look at localities and speak and research them and find them. So that's an overview of the website. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about some of the mills and the history of mills in itself. So mills have been used for thousands of years. Northern Ireland is actually home to one of the oldest excavated sites in the whole of Europe. So Nendrum Tide Mill outside Cumber. It's a really beautiful place if you're ever up that neck of the woods. It's tide mills, essentially. With the tide rising, the monks, I can't remember which order of the monks built it, but they built this causeway that you can see out of stones, and on the right hand side of that they dammed it at the top, so the water rose up when the tide went up, and they put a wooden block down which held the water in that on the right hand side, and then when they needed to mill their grain, when the tide went down, they opened up the sluice gate, which powered a water wheel or turbine, and that ground the grain. So it was all mechanized, 1,400 years ago. There's numerous of these kind of tide mills, especially around Strangford. You get them a lot in Europe, as mainland Europe. So talk about renewable energy and things like that. It's been going on for centuries and centuries, and not much of a fuss was made about it. So it dates to about 619 AD was when that was kind of fairly accurately dated. Corn mills, they're used for grinding grain, oats, wheat, barley, things like that, for flour. So the flour is either for vast, in the 1700s and 1800s, it was for kind of human consumption. Later on in the 1900s, it was either a very, very local consumption for, porridge, oats, and stirabout. Anyone heard about that? Yeah. So it was, all very local by the start of the 1900s, and then animal feed was another thing that they started to use, some of them as well. They worked generally from spring. They didn't work in the summertime because the crop was in the field. They had nothing to grind or mill. And then autumn and into winter was when they were fairly busy. There also wasn't enough water power in the summer months because a lot of these were in the kind of quite small streams. And even if they did have mill ponds that they could store water, it just wasn't enough to keep it going. And the farmers brought their grain to be ground at the mill. There's kind of various different processes in a corn mill. You have depending on how big or functional your corn mill was, some had one pair of millstones, some had two, some had three, and bigger ones had multiple. But the small mills, generally in Fermanagh here in this part, we just had the one pair, quite small affairs really. So they had to put the grain through what's called the shelling stones. These are big, kind of awkward, very locally made millstones, just like the ones you see at the entrance to Tully here. So that took the outer husk of the grain off and fell downstairs, and the miller then brought that grain to what's called a shilling hill or a whinny hill. Now, does anyone know any shilling hills or whinny hills here in this district or locally? No. Because it might just depend on the dialogue over here in Fermanagh, but what you get everywhere else is called shilling hills. It's essentially shelling hills. So the farmers it's generally like a hill or even a mountain where they threw up the grain. The dust and the outer core is very, very light, so it flies off in the wind. And the hard outer core, which is heavier and what you need to grind, is heavy. It falls down. Then it's brought from there back into the corn mill and ground again with better quality millstones that turns that kernel into flour. So it sounds like an easy process, but there's so many different moving parts to it, and a really quite interesting process itself. They started to appear more widely with the plantation of Ulster and kind of the society itself just advancing. So generally what you find with a lot of any plantation settlement, the first thing they built was, the big manor house, the church, but also the mill, because they couldn't attract people to the area without sustenance. So that if you didn't have a mill, you couldn't sustain that population. So mills were very, very important. They were also a way to tax people. So the farmers brought their produce to the mill. They would pay a tax to the landlord, essentially. So what was generally every 16th grain that went into the mill belonged to the landlord, and they would weigh the corn before and after just to make sure that he got his dues. They call that sucking, thirlage, or multure, just depending on, again, the words. That's another whole thing. You could go into a whole dissertation about the breakdown of words. And thirlage is Ulster Scots. You find that in the North Antrim quite a lot. Multure, sucking would be, Tyrone, County Down quite a lot. So they expanded with the plantation. They got even more important in the 1700s with, I suppose, the different corn laws, which was to boost local trade and to get more people being more productive. They built these large flour mills, so 4 or 5 story buildings. So Caledon, for example, other examples all over across the country, which were larger establishments which could do things more efficiently, but the small rural mills continue to be very, very important. However, when the corn laws were repealed, when the railways were established, this led to cheaper imports from abroad, America, and even the grain that they started to bring in from America, the maize. It couldn't be ground in the rural corn mills because it was too hard. So a lot of people had no option but to close their mill, the small mills. Corn mills were quite adaptable because they're just essentially a square, and so they can be adapted to flax or textile production. So or sawmills, which is another common thing that they did. So again, a very, very basic diagram. Corn mills, generally water powered, and 2 stories. Attached to a corn mill, you had a kiln or a kill, and the kiln, you had to bring your corn to be dried in the kiln first, because if you just put it into the mill in the millstones, it would just turn into a mush. It had to go down to like a 15% moisture rating before it went through the millstones. And they employed a kiln man who they would have burned turf and just to keep that going to dry it to that level. And he would have had to have turned the grain every so often as well, just to make sure that, of course, didn't burn or anything like that there. But mills and kilns especially, they were quite popular places for local people to congregate. You have, ceilidhs was a big thing they had in the kiln because of the heat of the place, and just its kind of open nature. So you find a lot of folklore attached to mills as well. Scotching mills, they're for flax production. They take the hard outer core of the flax plant, which is about 4 foot long, turns that into like a fibre. So just on the left, you can see these scotching stocks that the scotchers would have been standing in, holding the flax against big wooden blades, which take off the hard outer core. And those blades would be spinning like billy-o, really. And it was always said, a scotcher because he was missing a thumb or a couple of fingers or things like that. Again, the jobs in the mill, you had roller men, strickers, buffers, teasers, cleaners, finishers, people targing the toe. The toe is the bits at the bottom of the picture there. It's kind of like, it's a mat of fibre and shows, which is a woody material. So again, the words that we use there, even with that, they're completely defunct now because there is no flax or linen industry here anymore, sadly. But Scotchers they're quite well paid. If you were a Scotcher, you had a kind of guaranteed income. The more the harder you worked, the more money you got as well. But fortunately, it was like most of the mills, it was seasonal. And during World War II, there was a real boom in production, and they started to build more efficient factories, Belgian mills or patent mills. I think they built one outside Lisnaskea at some stage. But all in that, over 1,400 scotching mills in Ulster in the 1860s. There are only 2 of them now. 2 of them still work. We have McConville's in County Down, which is a really interesting place to see it working. And also in Ennish Scotch Mill outside Dungannon. The Harold Bennett there, he still scotches it every so often with the flax. But it's a real dying trade. And the same with the corn mills. There's no working physical corn mill in the country, which is a real shame, because we've lost those skills. You also lose that appreciation, I suppose, around it. That's a kind of a schematic of a diagram. It was actually a gentleman from England who was very good at this kind of CAD engineering stuff that broke it down. They're always the same, scotching mills, same layout. The buildings may look similar or different, but take it apart and they'll all look like this if they're water powered. So the scotchers stood in between each of these kind of blades at the other side of it. You also had this here, which was the rollers. So you put your flax through the rollers first to soften it. That was generally the child or a woman's job to do that. Again, very dangerous, severe. If you put your hand into that, it would drag you in up to your elbows, really, and a very dangerous piece of kit. And there was no emergency button or anything like that there. You had just to rely on someone to essentially turn off the water. And that was kind of how it was. So that's the basic of the big mills that we'll talk about. So looking at some of the early mills in this particular area, there's quite a lot referenced in about the 1600s. So Derry Gonley, Pienaar kind of his survey from the 1620s, he notes 2 watermills in the area. I don't know if it's obviously would have been one in Derry Gonley, but I'm not entirely sure where the other particular one was, or maybe they were connected. Manuscripts in 1696 write that there was a corn mill and a tuck mill. Tuck mills were for wool. They were very popular in the 1600s. However, by 1698 in King Billy, he essentially said, no more tuck mills, no more woolen industry for Ireland. He did that to placate the northern kind of English landlords and focus production up there. So there was a big tax essentially put on Irish wool. So that put an end to that. So you find a lot of the tuck mills became either corn mills or flax mills or bleaching mills for linen. This is the 1654. I can't remember if it's a civil survey, the Down survey, but they're actually really interesting because they do note a lot of the bogs and the townland names. This one here, it notes a mill. Now this is actually from Maguire's Bridge direction, and I haven't probably if I looked at it long enough, you'd be able to find exactly where it was. But again, there's clues. A church, the neighbouring townland is mentioned. So again, if you stare at these maps long enough, you do see quite a lot of interesting names. Even Abbey Land, actually, when I see someone there. Yes, so you could stare at that map and you'll find your history will jump out at you one way or the other. Because they were so important, they put them on a map. That's how important mills were. You don't see forges or anything like that. Mills were churches, and big houses. That's essentially what they did. Looking at the names of townlands in particular is quite interesting. Killywillan, for example, it roughly translates to mill wood. When you see willan, I think is for meaning of mill. I think it depends. In some cases, it depends. Now, there was a mill there in Killywillen townland from the 1830s, if not before that. The kind of historical background to mills is quite well recorded through the Ordnance Survey memoirs, which were kind of from 1834, and the whole idea of that was to give people an idea of the statistical breakdown of the counties and local areas and items of interest, local industries and all sorts. So mentions all sorts of very interesting things. There's the townland of Dore. I'm gonna absolutely butcher some names tonight, townland names. So please bear with me. Dore Denny. Anyone else know how to pronounce it? Dore Dini? No. Anyway, water wheel, 13 foot. Talks about the shrouding, the fall of water. Fall of water is the key thing. The fall gives you the power necessary to turn the water wheels and so forth. So 5 foot, 36 floats or buckets on the water wheel. Talks about the dimensions of the water course. Like, this information is just, the detail is bonkers. The class of the wheel's good, 2 pair of stones, each 5 foot diameter, 1 for grinding, 1 for shelling, 1 set of fans in motion with shelling stones, never grinds and shells together. The class of machinery is old, medium, rudely constructed, works constantly from September to April, 12 hours a day. And then talks about Mully Covet as well, a fall of water of 8 foot, so there's a massive big valley down there. 1 pair of millstones, old machinery, rudely constructed, constantly employed for 3 months in a year, 10 hours a day. And then another one further down. But even by this stage, they were talking about these mills being old, rudely constructed. This is 1830s, and grinds nothing but small bags for the country. So these are a real, very, very local affair. So it kind of gives you an idea of how locally based people were. People were coming to these particular mills to grind it. And I should say also, farmers in their deeds were told, you must go to the manor mill of Lisnaskea, you must go to the manor mill of Florence Court. You couldn't go anywhere else. If you went to another mill to get your meal grinded, you would pay like a huge tax, and it just meant it kept production quite local. And you had quite a lot of competition between the big landlords who built a mill at one side of the river and another who built it at the other side, and it just almost out of spite. But it was kind of just to mark their territory as well. So yes, the first mill I'm going to look at is Tully. I'm not going into massive detail about Tully because it's kind of well recorded here. The date of 1830s, I would imagine it possibly goes back a wee bit further than that. The field book of the first valuation survey notes the miller as the Earl of Enniskillen. Now, obviously the miller is highly unlikely to be the Earl of Enniskillen, but he was kind of the overall landlord. 1 pair of stones working 6 months in the year at 12 hours per day. So that was a fairly big concern, I would imagine, back then. And the buildings were valued at £7, which was quite considerable. By 1874, we have a George Walmsley, who was the miller. Earl of Enniskillen still owned it. It was noted as a corn mill and an office, and the valuation jumps to £9 in 1874, so they may have had some sort of improvement to the building to justify that jump. And you'll see here, just what's beautiful about here is that you can see, it's right in front of you to this day. Other places you go to are completely kind of almost spoiled in some case and overgrown, but here, and when I look back at the images, what this place looked like in the 90s, my goodness, these were very busy, I suppose, to get this place to where it is today. Absolutely fantastic job. But yeah, on the bottom left, you have the corn mill and kiln, mill pond, mentioned. So there are quite, important structures to mention. And the mill races themselves, they could some of them stretch for miles and miles. One in particular stretches for 2 miles, I would know of, but that again is just to get the height or the fall of the water. So if you build your mill stream further upstream, it's higher than the mill. So then when you come to drop it, you get more water power from it. This is the will of George Walmsley in 1882. Talks about in the parish of Killesher, of Tully in the parish of Killesher and County Fermanagh, miller and farmer, make this my last will and testament, removing all, and it goes on to mention essentially passing all his belongings, I leave and bequeath to my wife Anne, all that I possess. It goes on to mention at the end, where did I see this? It talks about some of the people that signed it off. So one was a William James Willis of Moneen. He was also a miller, which I'll come to in a minute, and another Walmsley as well. So this was on the Public Records Office. Again, it's all digitized. Their wills calendar, so they're quite a useful thing to make use of. It's kind of hit and miss whether you get anything. So this is a statement from I would imagine it was Fred Hammond, who was a kind of the industrial archaeologist, extraordinaire. He kind of describes that the fact that there were 2 drying floors in the kiln rather than the usual one is also of interest. The second kiln may have been added prior to 1834. Although the mill machinery is completely ruinous, sufficient survives to make good detailed recording worthwhile. The gearing is of interest as an example of cog and rung gearing, not just one set of stones, but to 2. The wheel is also of interest, although not original to the site. Its insertion reflects the fact that milling was still a viable enterprise in the area after the First World War. So that the cog and rung gearing that they used in Tully and another mill nearby, I think of Mullycovett, they're again very, very rudimentary, very, very basic. But because it's so basic, it was easily repaired, and you had a large degree of control over that. But it kind of limited, it was sufficient to meet the needs of a mill like Tully here. So they note that the water wheel was apparently obtained from Killymackin townland southeast of Derrylin, and the mill ceased in the 50s, I believe. Now it passed to, I think, the Nixons at one stage. So you see a lot of the names here. You have I think it was in 1920, Emily Nixon was one of the owners of the mill. This is her signature here. And also the census records talks, you have a Robert Nixon. He was a carpenter, Emily Nixon. And you also have a miller. Robert Armstrong was noted as being a miller here as well. That's this Tully Mill. Now there is another Tully Mill, and Barney was very kind to show me this site, and completely. I'm still not 100%, to be honest, Barney. I'm scratching my head about this one. I've come to all sorts of conclusions, and they've all been wrong or possibly wrong. This site here probably dates to the 1760s, probably maybe even before that. It was said to have been established by John Bradshaw. Now, the big landlords seem to have brought somebody over who had specialist knowledge on linen or bleaching or some sort of industry that would have been worthwhile to have close to Florence Court to attract people to the area, but also to give them employment. This record from 1765 notes to bring John Bradshaw of Lisbuck, County Monaghan, of 15 acres for the convenience of erecting a cloth mill, dwelling house and offices thereon in 1765. So 1760s was a real boom time in the linen industry. Linen was needed for the war, all the different continental wars that were being fought. It was used for clothing, bandages, all sorts of stuff. It was essentially the fighting fibre, as they talk about. Whether the bleaching mill was a success is doubt. I doubt it. Curiously, then something crops up as a candlewick factory or candlewick manufactory. Whether it's candle space wick or candlewick, the material that, if you're probably from a certain age, that people would know what a candlewick bedspread is. I honestly don't know. There's all sorts of conundrums, and it's kind of well documented that this mill, Tully Mill, in the history of water power in Ulster by Gribben. So candlewick was a type of thick cloth created from flax, but in most cases it was from cotton or wool. This would have been, if this is the case, it was the only site in Ireland to ever exist. Like they were never, you know, I never came across another one. In 1793, we have a Joseph Godber and Co. Coming over here and either buying the site from the Bradshaws or leasing it to establish this candlewick factory. So again, he may have been a flavour of the month or protege of the Earl of Enniskillen to set up some sort of cotton industry locally. And interesting enough, there was another cotton manufactory on the Claddagh Glen, which maybe was some sort of connection. However, cotton wasn't, you know, they imported that an awful lot from, you know, Manchester, places like that. But the availability of flax in the local area meant that they used that in most cases. Candlewick, I kind of put all different searches, and there's not massive amounts of it coming up. There's stuff called Bristol Candlewick, and if you look here, Enniskillen Candlewick, that's 1812. So whether that was produced here at that time, I know there was some sort of factory in Enniskillen, cotton related, but the fact that it's candlewick suggests it was possibly produced here at Tully. The buildings are really well built, real quality stone. Trying to read exactly what's going on with them is a bit strange. There's like buttresses out the side, which I would have said I've never seen before, but I went out this afternoon to look at another mill and I found another odd buttress to a mill. It's obviously overgrown now, but looking through this is the Registry of Deeds, so this dates from 1782. It's the lease from Mr. Bradshaw to Joseph Godber, and it talks about Godber's mill, which was, you know, the fact that it's called after himself, his mill, is of some importance because it was definitely, you know, established. So, sorry, the lease dates from 1782, but this one actually dates to 1813. So, you know, it was still possibly going at that stage. Just to give you an idea exactly where this place is so we're here, but it's just up there, so it's kind of northeast to it. Violet Hill, I think, was actually the Bradshaws. I think maybe lived there, or maybe the Godbers as well. I'm not 100% sure. Interestingly, as well, the townland south here is called Mullen or Bumper Lodge. Bumper is an odd thing because when I typed in Bumper, whatever came up, it was something related to Candlewick over in England. So it's whether that came over from abroad in the 1700s, a bump mill, as they talked about in places in England. I haven't got to the end of, I haven't really been able to finalise that. But Bumper Lodge, the fact that they put Mullen or Bumper Lodge is a bit of a strange addition. But it's, again, this is about the thing about local history. You never know, and you just have to kind of plow on and research, and something will come up at some stage. But we note here the Candlewick manufactory, which is spaced out in this case, so we don't know if it's talking about actual candle wicks or the actual material at the end. So this is the mill pond, still there, still fairly intact. You can see the kind of the basin, essentially, still very boggy. Adding to the mix here was the linen board. 1792, Daniel Bradshaw, linen inspector, Violet Hill, County Fermanagh, to Henry St George Cole, bleaching mill premises and lands in Tully for the sum of £500. This is in Prony. I haven't been able to actually I haven't got to see this, but it notes here this document gives a very detailed account of the land's premises rights and conditions. So 1792, it must still have been a bleaching mill for linen. 1793, we have a lease forever to Joseph Godber, bleacher, Tully, rent £30 per annum, which is again pretty big going. So he had money. Godber had money from the linen board. So if it was a candle, it couldn't have been a candle wick for the candles to burn them. So it had to have been some sort of material or cloth of some description. By coincidence, Barney, I don't know if I'm mad or I maybe spent too much time around mills. There was a stone. I saw a stone in that mill, and does not look like JG. No, I'm not even making this up. I'm not even photoshopping that. Could that be Joseph Godber? I mean, what are the chances? Yeah, isn't that mad? I was looking at that, the pictures back again. I can't even remember taking that picture, to be honest. But just the coincidence of that. Now it's quite high up, but it looks as if it's been etched, fairly deliberately, which is a bit mad. The candle wick industry ceased. The linen rose and fall, especially by the early 1830s. It became more of a County Down, Belfast orientated thing with better water power, more closer supply of flax. But we have scotching taking place at the Other Tully Mill in 1865. There is a very useful document if you have a flax mill on your land called Agricultural Statistics. They run from 1854 till 1875, and they give a breakdown of all the scotching mills in each county. So at the top here, you have the only one in Killesher, Tully, 1 mill, 6 stocks, 6 handles, and it works 8 months of the year. Sorry, 8 weeks of the year. So it had just started in 1865. It was kind of a very small concern. 1874, I was able to check 22 weeks of the year, so it obviously improved. There was a real, again, boom in linen production. 1865, it's pretty much the tail end of the American Civil War. And what farmers did was they had grants from the government, and also a lot of money was being made from the American Civil War in flax and linen production. So they converted their corn mills and all sorts into scotching mills. 1890, it was worked by a William Fleming, valued at £10. But the top, it's a very, very bad image, but this is Tully, but it doesn't note a mill of any description up there, which is completely wrong, of course, because we know it exists. It dates from 1882, it talks about William Fleming, but it talks about a house, land, and an office, but doesn't mention the mill. There's a document here from 1883, wanted head scotcher for the Tully Flax Mills Florence Court, a commodious dwelling house with many facilities free of all rent, including a quantity of land for potatoes and other crops will be given. Apply personally or by letter to William Fleming. And on the left, in 1881, we have the land of Tully for sale with the flax mill thereon. It talks about the water power, and there is a flax mill, large wheel house, water wheel, and gear complete. Also a carpenter's workshop at the rear, and 6 labourers' cottages also on the land. Now, interest talks about a wheel house. The water wheel for Tully, as we saw, would have been inside the mill. And there was also another building as well, so there would have been 2 kind of water wheels there. So a very, very interesting site, and one you'd need a real full day there. But to make matters more complicated, scotching ceased, and it was converted into a sawmill of some description. So there was an awful lot of sawmills in Fermanagh compared to any other county for one reason or another. I'm not entirely sure why that is the case, but probably availability of timber. There was a real boom in the timber industry in the early 1900s. And you had the big estate next door, but Tully had their own sawmill as well. So there was 3 sawmills in this very small locality, which is of interest. So progress to a lot of mills meant getting rid of the water wheels because they were inefficient. They were, not great. There were all sorts of maintenance needed to them. So what they started to do in the 30s, 40s, 50s is put these kind of turbines to mills. Turbines are more efficient, more production, and in this case, the water just went into this kind of chute or penstock right onto the turbine blade and powered all the machinery. Really quite a feat of engineering. There's different belts and pulleys in the building itself, possibly for transferring the power from one part of the building to another. So it would have been a real hive of activity and quite interesting. This is just to give you an idea of what some other sawmills look like. This is one near me, Cookstown, Moneymore. They kind of clamp the timber and these. It's almost like a kind of a railway kind of bogey, and then it's either a circular saw or just a frame that goes up and down, and the water power turns that, and the blade just goes up and down and up and down. So it's quite a long, laborious process. But also at Florence Court as well, there's the sawmill, which dates to 1848. The water wheel was by a William Maxwell. I'm not entirely sure, the fact that it has his name on it, I'm not entirely sure who William Maxwell was. Now, there is a Maxwell's out at Finnebro, County Down, who I think one of them was some sort of an engineer, but I'm not sure. It might be something more local. The production at Florence Court, railway sleepers, wheels, gates, flooring, all sorts of things. And the saw blade is noted as turning at 600 RPM, so you can imagine how quickly that went. The census records note Pat Flanagan as a wood sawyer in the townland of Tully, so highly likely he was at the mill at Tully sawing. Now, he had 7 daughters. So there was, he probably had his hands full there. No, he had no one to follow maybe in his footsteps. So of course, it could have been, but very, very interesting. And also on site nearby are these brick, local Arnie brick, more than likely, cottages, labourers' cottages. This is one here, just up from it, and very, very simple buildings. 2 stories. There's a really, really steep staircase up to upstairs, but really quite interesting, I suppose, accommodation. Now, quickly moving on to the other different places. This is Knockaghehan. It's just Claddaglen is just to the north of that. OS Memoirs, 1844, talk about a cotton manufactory, which has not been used for 30 years. So again, roughly about the time that Joseph Godber was doing something at Tully. So you can see the cotton manufactory in ruins. I don't think there's any, I looked at the aerial footage, aerial imagery, but there's nothing significant there. And there may well be, somewhere, whether that was water powered, I'm not 100%, because there's no mill race even mentioned on that map. And it's actually quite a steep area. So I'm not sure if that was water powered or maybe powered by a horse or some other method. And also there was the talk about harvesting of bog cotton for making candle wicks and pillows at Claddaglen. That was something else that was picked up, which again confuses things with candle wick and candle wick, the cloth. So there's a lot of very interesting stories to come out, I think, here. So this is so the cotton manufactory is just down there, but to the northeast of that is a corn mill at Moneen. It was dated, the first kind of runner of that, or miller, was a James Stutt. Earl of Enniskillen is the landlord. In 1836, it was working 4 months of the year at 12 hours per day with one pair of millstones. So again, a real tiny wee mill. It passed to the Willis family, and the Willises were, one of them was a signatory there of Mr. Fleming's, certificate. So they were all connected, all these mill owners, they're all connected one way or the other. But by 1884, this had no value, so it had stopped, essentially. It had ceased production by that stage. I was just there actually this afternoon doing some trespassing, just to see what it was like. There's bits and pieces left. There's just the stones, and there's these kind of strange buttresses that are there. The kiln is still there, and also this building here, which is more than likely the cottage that the miller lived in, that's still there. So it's quite an interesting wee settlement in itself, but no machinery of any description. The infrastructure, the mill race can be seen. If you're down there, you can see a big line of trees. That's essentially the mill race. So again, a really nice kind of setting, almost preserved there. Gubbercrock Mill, that's a fairly early one. That's 1737 is the earliest I can trace that back to. So on the right-hand side is this deed, 1737, agreeing to an Irvine, and it talks about the Gubbercrock with the mill thereon. So again, there were quite important things to record. The miller in 1836 was a Gerard Strafford, one pair of stones, and after that it became kind of the Wallace family who kind of worked that. Right from 1860s to 20s is when kind of the records kind of stopped for me to kind of access it. So I don't think anything's left of this mill at all. It's just on the I can't remember that road name, but New Line would have been on your right-hand side. But again, they were quite skillful. They had these big mill ponds. They always had mill ponds to keep production. Now this is one outside Killesher, but not a million miles away. So this is Callow Hill Corn Mill in the townland of Milltown. So mill towns, are so numerous; they're absolutely everywhere. This site of this mill, I think, possibly 1742. Again, there's a deed that mentions the mills, the royalties and mines and all sorts of Callow Hill. So again, they put that in writing that something was there. That continued right until the 60s. That was kind of stopped when it closed. Quite a, again, a nice setting. You have the kiln. This is the kiln building, and the mill is kind of facing outwards. So Surfless family were the Millers, and it was McManus, and then Smith, and then Cassidy's were the last kind of owners there. Still owners today. So essentially Corn Mill mentioned here. I kind of when I drove down today, I kind of wondered what the townland of Milltown was called before the mill was there. That's kind of a theological argument for someone someday to look at, but kind of interesting. If there was no mill, it must have been called something else. It must have been something maybe more local. So this is really quite a spectacular mill. One of the best kind of corn mills I've ever been to, actually, because it's kind of intact, almost untouched. There were all sorts of different additions to the mill. Talked about the stirabout that was kind of right up until it closed. Farmers came in with their oats and all sorts. One millstone came from Ranks Mill in Belfast, in the docks. So how on earth that came here, horse and cart, or maybe train actually to maybe the nearest station. But even still, that would have been serious travel. That came from Ranks Mill after the Blitz of Belfast. Yes. And all our items came from Belfast, so there's different receipts I was able to have a wee quick look at from Riddle's Warehouse, which is on Ann Street. Interestingly, there's a project to restore that building at the minute in Belfast, and it was essentially for any ironwork and things like that, nails, screws. That's where you went to get your iron, essentially. So yes, on the left-hand side, you'll see the two millstones, again, grinding stones, or shelling stones. Inside, you have the mill machinery. There's actually 3 millstones in this one. One was specifically for milling wheat, and one was for shelling, and you had a good pair of stones, which were French burr stones. They come in segments, so they're like maybe that bit, and there's another segment and another segment. They were, in some cases, put like a big iron bar around them and set them in plaster to kind of keep them intact. But why they used French burr stone was because it was a really, real good cutting stone. That the local material, wasn't much good, to be honest. But that, French burr stone for mills is used, all throughout Europe just for that reason. It's just to the north of Paris, actually. And, they're absolutely everywhere, and they come in wee segments of about, a foot each, and then they bind them together. We have, on the left-hand side, this is inside the kiln building, and, you note the black, the soot, stained everywhere, so that would have been fairly constant going. On the right-hand side, you have the notice, every care will be taken, but the owner will not be responsible for any accident of any kind. John Cassidy, Milltown. So again, another real interesting piece of history there. And inside the kiln, what they've used is a lot of fire bricks just to withstand the heat of the kiln, which was constant. So Coal Island fire brick, very, very famous for its high kind of burning resistant bricks. This is on the timber, so you can see someone's traced a millstone and the different cutting angles that they're going to put into it. So this is either the millwright who's came out to service the millstones. The millstones have to be serviced every 6 months to sharpen them. So again, that's a whole nother avenue of work for somebody. We have the one name we know for sure who worked in the mill was Thomas Maguire. I think this is 1911. He was 72 years old, agricultural labourer and corn kiln dryer. So he was working at that mill, turning the grain to dry out the corn. And in that corn kiln, every single brick has someone's initials, someone's name, a date. My God, yes, please somebody go in there and record each of that, because that is such a moment in time there, because you just don't find that in most places, but it's so rare. I mean, and local people like yourselves will be able to figure out who those people are. So Maguire's was one. There's a date stone from 1918. You kind of wonder what's all the significance and all behind all this. But I kid you not, every single brick has somebody's name written on it. This is a kind of a bronze plaque. Gerald Green, millwright from County Cavan. He was actually a very, very famous millwright. He went all across the country, servicing mills, fixing up the water wheels. There's another of his plaques I think it's in Cavan, there's a mill in Cavan. I think it has his name on it. And on the left, the millstones, they have all sorts of designs on them, all kind of packed out. Some have kind of diagonal cutting lines into it as well. That's kind of it's so dark to get a really good picture, and I use it. I probably should use my phone more than my actual camera, but I mean the workings are really, really quite interesting. The water wheel would turn, it powers the interior machines, and it can work 2 millstones at one time. And there's all sorts of pulleys as well that transfer power all throughout the mill. So essentially, rethinking the mill, they're more than a source of power and a simple process. They did all sorts of, different jobs. Local people had all sorts of memories attached to them. This is another place that Barney introduced me to, up in the bog in the middle of nowhere. This is a millstone quarry that maybe highly likely that it came from, some of the millstones in this locality came from up there, Slieve Rasheen. They had to be sharpened millstones by a millwright. That's a specialist job. That's a job that doesn't exist here anymore, in this country anyway. You had a millwright repairing the water wheels, the bearings, the gears, and all sorts. And I really think that they're so worth preserving or keeping, either as kind of a folly of some description, or in the case of likes of Tully or Mullycovet, to bring them back into some sort of use. And seeing a water wheel turn, really, that's the stuff that you go to Europe for and to see the real deal. But we do have these sites here too, they're so unique to us. Like the fact that there's the only candlewick factory here, just the stone's throw away, is something really, really quite special. And some of the other types of mills here. So it's very important to preserve them. But that's all I have for tonight. I'm not sure how long I spoke for there, but hopefully it's not too late. But if you do have questions, please, I'll be hopefully glad to answer them.